Divine Love. We are going live on multiple platforms. Please bear with me. I am going over some of the laws that we stand upon dealing with decolonization. So, for everybody who does not understand decolonization or believe that it's real, I'm going over some laws on the website for the United Nations, and you can check this out for yourself at ohchr.org. That is the Office of the High Commissioner. That's the website where you can find the information on decolonization and that it is a real thing, it's a real law, and it is in full effect. Okay? And it has been for a number of years. So, this is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Okay? And this is a law that indigenous peoples can stand upon. If you do not know that you are indigenous, then these laws will not protect you. You do not have a lawful or a legal standing if you do not know that these laws apply to you. So if you are claiming something other than indigenous and you are blood type A or a descendant of a blood type A individual or parent, you are among the affairs of man. You are the original man who is called Aborigine or Aboriginal throughout the world. So these are the laws that you need to stand upon to reserve your rights and all of your inheritance. Okay. So the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted and agreed upon September 13th, 2007 by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and it was agreed upon by all the nations of the world. And it is also, it goes under the acronym of UNDRIP, UNDRIP. Okay, so these are, I'm going to share with you the laws, international laws that you can use in your territory, in your country, that you have the right to stand upon. And this is worldwide. Okay, you need to learn how to find the laws to stand, to make your lawful stand as an indigenous inhabitant and make your claims with any court of law that has to respect international law. These are laws that are agreed upon worldwide in every country, island, and territory. So I'm reading from the High Commissioner's website for the United Nations. Okay, this is the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Welcomed the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples by the General Assembly on September 13th, 2007, as a triumph for justice and human dignity following more than 2 decades of negotiations between governments and indigenous peoples and their representatives. So let me just add something really quick what happened in 2006, the World Court, International Courts of Justice, ordered the Queen of the lady who was calling herself the Queen of England, Elizabeth Windsor of London, England. She was ordered to give all Aborigine indigenous inhabitants their rights back. I remember this specifically when it happened because everybody in Canada, I'm from Detroit, so all of us who were on the indigenous movement, the movement of the Moors, the movement for our autonomy and indigenous rights, we knew about this because we went over across the border and applied for our card that says the Aborigine card that they were giving out and still offering today to be recognized as Aboriginal or Aborigine. And at that time, we were asking, what are the qualifications for us to be able to do this? Because we would often go back and forth to Canada because the border for Detroit is right there. So we would always go over there. So customs, immigration gave us the application and they told us if you're black, you qualify. So it was widely known that Aborigine of America and worldwide had been given the rights back that were taken from us through colonialization. And the Queen of England, this is widely known. You can look it up. You can do your own due diligence, which I recommend you learn these things for yourself. So in 2006, that was a major win for all the lands, islands, and territories that were being occupied and claimed by the Queen of England, Elizabeth Windsor. So she had to, at that time, the entire so-called royal family and monarchy had began to unravel because she had to give everybody their rights back because they were taken unlawfully through the colonial era, forced assimilation. They had acquired the land and the status of being royal by force and occupation. It's not by blood that they acquired this power. So they had to give all the indigenous inhabitants their rights back. And I know several individuals, and I still have the application. I shortly after I got the application, I moved down south to North Carolina, where my residence is now. So I didn't finish the application, but I still have the application that was given to me in my own two hands from a representative in Canada to get our card that identifies us as Aboriginal. So I'm telling you now, if you are an indigenous inhabitant and you are claiming a corporate fiction under a color, then you are being deprived of your rights. You need to claim who you are as an indigenous inhabitant. If you are blood type A, blood type AB, Aborigine or Aboriginal, you fall under the protections of the International Courts of Justice and the United Nations Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So let me get into this. So that was in 2006. The Queen, the so-called Queen of England, she lost the case in the World Court and she was ordered to give all indigenous peoples their rights back. So a year after, approximately a year after, the United Nations had to agree upon the the multilateral agreement of the rights of indigenous peoples. So this is where the United Nations has agreed on September 13th, 2007, as a triumph for justice and humanity, human dignity, following more than 2 decades of negotiations of governments and indigenous peoples and their representatives worldwide. It was adopted with 144 votes in favor of the United Nations, absent of 4 countries that was still fighting this agreement was Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and United States of America. But in 2018 or 2017, President Barack Obama agreed to join the Americas with this agreement, the rights of indigenous peoples. So you may be asking why those 4 chose not to adopt the rights of indigenous peoples is because these false rulers were still maintaining a stronghold over America, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. So they didn't want to agree to the rights of indigenous peoples. But now, fast forward in 2016, an indigenous heir to the land came back and made the claim back for the land. So these false rulers no longer have a say so at law. What they had been claiming was that the land was abandoned and they didn't want these corporate entities didn't want to release any powers back to the lands of the indigenous inhabitants because there was no indigenous rulership or governance to claim it back. So that's what they were trying to use. So now, like I said, President Barack Obama, correct me if I'm wrong, go check what year it was. It was either 2017 or 2018 that President Obama agreed to the rights of indigenous peoples. So now America is also protected. The indigenous inhabitants of America are also protected along with the 144 other countries that agreed worldwide for all indigenous peoples to have their rights back and to have their land and for the land to be decolonized. So the land was deemed decolonized in 1960 and then in year 2007. So that's where we are here, where I'm reading from the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So the summary for the rights of indigenous peoples by the UN Convention is a declaration in the most comprehensive instrument detailing the rights of indigenous peoples in international law and policy, containing minimum standards for the recognition, protection, and promotion of these rights. It establishes a universal framework of minimum standards for survival, dignity, well being, and rights of the world's indigenous peoples. Do you hear that? Do you hear what this is saying? That all peoples, indigenous peoples worldwide, are to be protected under this international law. So this is what you have to stand on for your protections in any legal framework. These are the laws that protect you. The Declaration addresses both individual and collective rights, cultural rights, identity, rights to education, health, employment, language, and others. It outlaws discrimination against indigenous peoples and promotes their full and effective participation in all matters that concern them. It also ensures their right to remain distinct and to pursue their own priorities in economic, social, and cultural development. The Declaration explicitly encourages harmonious and cooperative relations between states and indigenous peoples. So we have to start taking the efforts to stand on these laws. If we do not stand on these laws and act in these um, in the capacity under the protections of these laws, meaning that if you are still claiming a status of black, you cannot be protected under these international laws. So, whatever somebody is trying to do, impose upon you, or enforce upon you, whether it be right or wrong, lawful or not, you cannot be protected under the international law. And that's what I really want to impress upon the youth, to learn your rights. You have to learn what your rights are as it pertains to your status. You cannot keep claiming a status that does not protect you. Okay, so for instance, the status of black does not protect you. You see everything that's going on the land, Homeland Security deporting everybody, all of these different nationalities and immigrants that came to America are being detained. They're being deported because we are in decolonization. We are finally in the full bloom of decolonization, but it's not being said as that. It's not being reported as decolonization. They're not giving an explanation as to why they're deporting people without question anymore. Because this is the law, the international law that has been invoked. Okay, so that's what's going on, and that's why it's important to claim your proper status. You have to go on the record as being indigenous. Indians are not from America. Okay, that's another misnomer that we are doing away with. We are doing away with the term Indian. It does not exist. This is a made up term. Indians are from India, they are not from America. So, all of these made up terms that were made up by the Inquisition and by the colonialists who have been decolonized have to have been washed away, and that they are null and void at law. Okay, so we have to start using the proper terms to identify ourselves. If you don't identify yourself properly, then you cannot be considered under the law or have protections under the law. Black does not give you any protections under the law. Okay, so you all have to understand this, study, and learn your rights, and go and check out what I'm saying. Do your own due diligence so that you know what to do and how to handle your affairs, so that you are not rounded up in this group or rounded up in any form or fashion without your proper status being duly noted on the record. It's very important at this time that you know how to identify yourself. Okay, and that is pursuant to the law as it pertains to indigenous inhabitants. And most of us here in America, if you're blood type A, you are from America and you are indigenous to the land. So everybody worldwide, even in America and everywhere, if you are indigenous to the land, you have to identify yourself as such, because we're coming into a time where you have to make it known who you are and the lands that you are attached to, or else you have no rights, you have no legal redress at law. So this is very important for everybody to know, to claim your proper status. A proper status is not a color. Okay, so that's what it is clearly stating at law. You have to, in order to receive the protections under the law, you have to identify yourself as a lawful inhabitant, and that is whatever tribe or band or bloodline you are from. And it falls under the rights of indigenous peoples. So you can find the full details of this law on the UN the United Nations website, which is the OCH, pardon me, OHCHR.org. Okay. And then we have also the declaration that was agreed upon unilaterally, multilaterally agreed upon in the year 1960. Okay, and this is international law also. It's on the legal, you can find this on the legal page of the United Nations. That's legal.un.org. And that is the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. New York, December 14th, 1960. Okay, so this has been long agreed upon for the lands to be decolonized and occupied and governed by the indigenous peoples of said lands. The Declaration on the Granting of Indigenous, um, the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 14th, 1960. The deliberate location of the United Nations vote in the General Assembly rather than in the Security Council, where a permanent member's veto will always be available to anyone or more than 3% members that still had colonial legal ties or associations, was an obvious enough choice for the political activist states sponsoring Resolution 1514, and the timing of the vote in 1960, when the decolonization process was already well underway, was hardly fortuitous. A working majority in favor of the patent and anti colonialist measure would not become politically possible until the General Assembly's transformation from its original very narrow base of representation, limited to the states members of the victorious wartime alliance against fascism, to something more nearly reflective in cultural and ideological terms of the world community at large. Now, if you listen to me previously, you will hear me say, um, Everything has to revert before the time, go back to the time before the war. Basically, this is what they're saying when it says the representation limited to the states members of the victorious wartime alliance against fascism to something more nearly reflective in cultural and ideological terms of the world community at large. By the year 1960, this had begun to be achieved, albeit on an intermittent or casual step-by-step basis over the decade and a half of from wars. Let me go back. Over the decade and a half from war's end, the numerical breakthrough had occurred as late as 1955, when 16 new states had been admitted in one big step to membership, bringing the total to 76 countries, uh, islands, and territories a part of this agreement. It had came to a total of 76. In 1960 itself, 19 new states have been admitted, sealing the emergence of what became in Cold War terms a neutralist or uncommitted major voting coalition, variously styled as the Non Aligned Bloc. The Group of 77, the Vanguard Group, the developing or third world countries. It was this informal electoral alliance that provided the intellectual cohesiveness and also the political tactical competence to secure the adoption of the Resolution 1514 without a single express dissent in the General Assembly. So, this was a unanimous multilateral world agreement in 1960 of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to colonial countries and peoples. So it's long overdue that we govern ourselves, the indigenous tribes, whether recognized federally or not. And let me just say, the federally recognized tribes, so called Indian tribes, are the tribes that were created by the colonialists when they came into America under false dolls, roles. They made individuals Indians and gave them rights and land and benefits as Indians for $5. They were not indigenous to the land. They came into America by the boatloads and named themselves as Indians and Indian tribes, which became the federally recognized tribes, where they were ciphering out the monies, the royalties, the benefits of the true heirs to the land. They were fraudulent. All Dawes Rose Indians and their groups and tribes were not indigenous to America at all. So I'm pretty sure that this type of operation had been going on in other countries because everything began to get whitewashed, as they call it. That means that they were pushing out the Aboriginal and Aborigines, the darker skinned inhabitants, and bringing in the false heirs to the land who had been benefiting and claiming to be authentically indigenous or Indians or royal or imperial when they were not. So all of this has to be corrected, but it starts with us correcting our status, correcting the way we are identified at law, politically, first spiritually, politically, and financially, because it all deals with our inheritance. So we have to correct the issue at the root. So that's all I'm going to say for today. And I hope you all got something out of it. And go and do your own due diligence because it's worldwide. It has been decided worldwide. So the people of Palestine and all of the people who are supporting the people of Palestine just keep relying on the international law and agreements that have already been made, and it has already been decided in every court of law for the indigenous inhabitants to be decolonized. So it really should not be a fight. It should not be a war at this point. It has long been decided. So it's up to us to bring back all of these laws that were already decided in the year 1960 and stand upon them and support those who are standing upon them and need to be protected under these laws. Ashe, Ashe Wa. Peace and divine love to my family worldwide, all indigenous inhabitants. Keep the faith, stand on the law, the spiritual law, ecclesiastic law, and the international law to retrieve your ancestral estates. The land was promised to you. Ashe. Ashe Wa. And see you tomorrow. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. We will be back tomorrow to share more of this stream.